Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his palms as he stood in the docking bay of the horizon's edge. The human diplomatic vessel had been stationed at the edge of neutral space for 3 days, waiting for this moment. Around him, other crew members checked their uniforms and whispered nervously to each other. Everyone knew what was coming. The Veltharians were finally arriving. Captain Linda Hayes stood at the front of the reception line, her face calm but her eyes sharp. She had drilled the entire crew for weeks about proper protocol. The Veltharians were not like other alien species humanity had encountered. They were warriors, born and bred for combat. Their society valued strength above everything else. They saw emotions as a sign of weakness. One wrong move, one misunderstood gesture, and the alliance humanity desperately needed could fall apart before it even began. Jake took his position in the line. As a junior cultural liaison officer, he was not important enough to speak during the initial greeting. His job was to observe, to take notes, and to learn everything he could about their guests. Still, his heart pounded in his chest. This was the biggest moment of his career. The docking clamps engaged with a heavy thud that echoed through the bay. Red warning lights switched to green. The airlock door began to slide open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. They came through like a tide of scaled muscle and controlled power. The first Veltharian through the door was massive, easily 7 feet tall. Her scales were deep crimson, polished to a shine that caught the overhead lights. She wore what looked like ceremonial armor, though Jake knew from his training that it was actually functional combat gear. Every piece of their clothing served a purpose. Nothing was just for show. This was Commander Zyrith, leader of the Veltharian delegation. Her golden eyes swept across the assembled humans with the calculating gaze of a predator. Jake felt his throat go dry. The reports had not done her justice. She looked like she could tear through a steel door with her bare hands. Behind her came 4 more Veltharians, each one just as impressive. They moved with perfect synchronization, their boots hitting the deck in unison. But it was the 5th one who caught Jake's attention and held it. She was smaller than the others, though still taller than any human in the room. Her scales were a different color too, a deep azure blue that seemed to shift in the light. Where the others looked straight ahead with rigid military bearing, she allowed her golden eyes to wander slightly, taking in the details of the human ship with what seemed like genuine curiosity. Captain Hayes stepped forward and began the formal greeting. She spoke in careful, measured tones, using the phrases that human linguists had determined were appropriate for Veltharian protocol. Commander Zyrith responded in kind, her voice deeper than any human woman's, carrying a resonance that Jake felt in his chest. The translation devices everyone wore handled the language conversion smoothly. The Veltharians had provided the technology as a gesture of good faith before the meeting. It was one of the few times they had ever shared their tech with another species. Jake listened carefully as the formal introductions progressed. When Commander Zyrith introduced her officers, he learned that the blue-scaled Veltharian was named Kaivra. She held the rank of diplomatic attaché, which according to Jake's briefing materials, meant she was both a combat veteran and a trained negotiator. Among the Veltharians, only the most exceptional warriors earned that position. The greeting ceremony lasted 20 minutes. Then, Captain Hayes led the delegation toward the conference rooms that had been prepared for the negotiations. Jake followed at the back of the group with the other junior officers, still taking mental notes. He noticed that Kaivra walked with a slight difference in her gait compared to the other Veltharians, where they moved with rigid, controlled steps. Hers had a subtle fluidity to them. It was barely noticeable, but Jake had trained himself to spot such details. The conference room was large and carefully designed to accommodate both species. The Veltharians required higher gravity than humans preferred, so the room had been adjusted to a compromise level. The chairs were reinforced to handle their weight. The temperature was set cooler than humans liked, but warmer than Veltharians normally preferred. The first session of talks began immediately. Jake sat at a side table with his datapad, recording observations. The main negotiations were about trade routes and mutual defense. The Veltharian Empire controlled a large section of space that humanity needed access to. In return, humans had agricultural technology that could help feed Veltharian colony worlds. But beneath the official talk, everyone knew the real issue. The Krellic swarm was spreading through the outer sectors. Neither humanity nor the Veltharians could stop them alone. Together, they might have a chance. This meeting was about more than trade. It was about survival. Jake watched Kyvra throughout the session. She sat slightly behind Commander Zyrith, only speaking when called upon. But her eyes were constantly moving, studying the human delegates with an intensity that made Jake wonder what she was thinking. Twice during the session, he caught her looking directly at him. Each time, she quickly looked away, her expression unchanged. Veltharians did not show emotion on their faces the way humans did. Their features were too different, their facial structure built for intimidation rather than expression. The first session ended after 2 hours. Captain Hayes called for a break, and both delegations stood. The Veltharians moved toward one side of the room, while the humans naturally gravitated to the other. It was not hostile, just a natural separation, as each group processed what had been discussed. Jake was reviewing his notes when he felt someone watching him. He looked up to find Kyvra standing a few feet away. She was alone, having separated slightly from her group. Her golden eyes were fixed on him with that same intense curiosity he had noticed earlier. For a moment, neither of them moved. Jake's training screamed at him to be careful. Veltharians had accidentally injured members of other species before. Their strength was difficult for them to control in social situations, and they had no instinct for gentleness. But something in the way she was looking at him did not feel threatening. It felt more like the way a scholar might examine something fascinating and new. Jake made a decision. He stood slowly, making sure his movements were clear and non-threatening. He gave a small nod, the kind of acknowledgement that was considered polite in both cultures according to his training. Kyvra tilted her head slightly, an almost bird-like gesture. Then, to his surprise, she nodded back. It was a small moment, barely worth noting. But as Jake sat back down and returned to his notes, he felt like something significant had just happened. He had made contact, real contact, with one of the most dangerous and least understood species in the galaxy. He had no way of knowing that this brief exchange would change everything. That within days, he would be lying in a medical bay with broken ribs. That the careful diplomatic dance would nearly collapse into disaster. That the simple act of seeing Kyvra as a person, rather than just an alien warrior, would set in motion events that neither humans nor Veltharians could have predicted. All he knew in that moment was that Kyvra was watching him, and he was watching her. And somewhere in that mutual observation, a bridge was beginning to form between two very different worlds. The second day of negotiations started early. Jake had barely slept, his mind racing with everything he had observed during the first session. He had spent hours reviewing his notes, comparing them with the cultural database humanity had compiled on the Veltharians. There was so much they still did not understand about these people. The morning session was even more tense than the first day. The topic had shifted to military cooperation, and both sides were being extremely careful with their words. Commander Zyrith laid out the Veltharian position with cold precision. Captain Hayes responded with equal formality. Every sentence had to be weighed. Every phrase considered for possible offense. Jake found it exhausting to watch. This was diplomacy at its most rigid, where one wrong word could end everything. By midday, Captain Hayes called for a lunch break. The Veltharians and humans would eat separately, as their nutritional needs were too different to share meals. But they had been given access to a shared common area, a large room with observation windows looking out at the stars. Jake grabbed a nutrition bar and a water bottle, then headed to the common area. He wanted to see if he could observe the Veltharians in a more relaxed setting. Maybe he would learn something useful for his reports. The room was beautiful, he had to admit. The station designers had placed it at a junction point, where a nearby nebula was visible through the reinforced windows. Swirls of purple and blue gas stretched across the view, lit from within by newborn stars. It was the kind of sight that made you remember how big the universe really was. Jake was surprised to find Kyvra standing alone near the main window. The other Veltharians were clustered on the far side of the room, engaged in what looked like a tactical discussion. But Kyvra had separated herself from the group, her attention completely focused on the nebula outside. Jake hesitated. His training told him to leave her alone. Veltharians valued their personal space. Approaching one without invitation could be seen as a challenge. But something about the way she stood there, so still and focused, made him curious. He walked over slowly, making sure his footsteps were audible. Veltharian hearing was excellent, so she would know he was approaching. She did not turn around, but her posture shifted slightly. She was aware of him. Jake stopped a respectful distance away and looked out at the nebula. Beautiful, is it not? Kyvra turned her head slightly, those golden eyes fixing on him. There was a long pause, and Jake wondered if he had made a mistake. Then she spoke. We do not have such phenomena near our homeworld. This is unfamiliar. Her voice was different from Commander Zyrith's. Still deep, still carrying that resonant quality all Veltharians had, but somehow less harsh. There was almost a softness to it, though Jake knew that word would probably offend her if he said it out loud. It is called the Larsen Nebula, Jake said, relaxing slightly. She was willing to talk, which was a good sign. It is about 300 light-years from Earth. We discovered it about 50 years ago during early exploration missions. Kyvra looked back at the nebula. Your species explores for beauty? The question caught Jake off guard. Sometimes, he admitted. We explore for resources, for knowledge, for new worlds to settle. But yes, sometimes we go places just because they are beautiful, just to see what is out there. Kyvra was silent for a moment, processing this. My people explore for strategic advantage, for territory, for resources that make us stronger. Does that work for you? Jake asked, then immediately worried he had been too bold. But Kyvra did not seem offended. It has made us the dominant force in our region of space. We have conquered 17 star systems. No one challenges us. Ever, no one. That sounds lonely, Jake said before he could stop himself. Kyvra turned to face him fully now, and Jake's breath caught. Her entire posture had changed, becoming more alert, more focused. He had said something that interested her. Explain, she said. Jake chose his words carefully. Being the strongest means no one equals you. No one challenges you, yes, but also no one stands beside you. You have subordinates and enemies, but no peers. That seems lonely to me. For a long moment, Kyvra simply stared at him. Jake could not read her expression, but he felt like something was happening behind those golden eyes. Some calculation, some evaluation. Your species thinks differently, she said finally. You seek equals. You seek cooperation. We seek connection, Jake said. We are stronger together than apart. That is what we believe, anyway. Kyvra turned back to the nebula. They stood in silence for a while, and to Jake's surprise, it was comfortable. He found himself relaxing, letting go of some of the tension he had been carrying since the Veltharians arrived. Tell me about Earth, Kyvra said suddenly. Jake blinked. What do you want to know? Everything. Anything. What is it like to live there? And so, Jake talked. He told her about Earth's oceans, how they covered most of the planet in blue. He told her about forests and mountains and cities that reached into the sky. He told her about seasons, how the weather changed and the world transformed 4 times every year. Kyvra listened with an attention that was almost hungry. She asked questions, good questions that showed she was really thinking about what he said. She wanted to understand, not just gather information. At some point, Jake started telling her a story about his first attempt at rock climbing back on Earth. He had been 15, overconfident, and had ended up stuck halfway up a cliff face while his friends laughed at him from below. The rescue team had to come get him, and he had been too embarrassed to try again for years. As he described his younger self, Clinging to the rocks and trying not to look down, Jake found himself laughing at the memory. And that was when he saw it. The scales along Kyvra's neck had changed color. The deep azure blue had shifted, becoming lighter, almost pink-tinged. It was subtle, easy to miss if you were not looking directly at her. But Jake was looking, and he saw it clearly. His cultural training kicked in immediately. He had read about this. Color changes in Veltharian scales were tied to emotional states. Most Veltharians controlled it perfectly, keeping their scales at their natural color at all times. Showing a color change was considered a loss of control, a display of weakness, and this particular color, the light pink tone, was associated with what the human researchers had cautiously labeled as affection or attraction. It was the Veltharian equivalent of blushing. Jake felt a surge of warmth in his chest. There was something touching about seeing this fierce warrior, this member of one of the galaxy's most dangerous species, having such a human reaction to a simple story. The words came out before he could think about them. "That is actually kind of cute." He said it with a smile, with warmth, the same way he might compliment a friend. It was meant as a connection, a moment of shared humanity, or shared whatever the equivalent was, between species. But the moment the words left his mouth, Jake knew he had made a terrible mistake. Every muscle in Kyvra's body went rigid. The pink tone in her scales brightened, flooding across her neck and up onto her face. But now, it was not gentle. It was vivid, burning, impossible to miss. The entire room went silent. Every Veltharian turned to look. Commander Zyrith's head snapped around, her eyes widening in what Jake recognized as shock. The other Veltharians stood frozen, staring at Kyvra with expressions that might have been horror or disbelief or both. Kyvra's voice came out as barely more than a whisper, but Jake heard every word clearly. Cute? The single word trembled with rage, with humiliation, with something Jake could not identify but knew was dangerous. Her golden eyes fixed on him, and for the first time since meeting her, Jake felt genuine fear. He opened his mouth to apologize, to explain, to take it back somehow. But he never got the chance. Kyvra moved. She was fast. Faster than Jake's eyes could track. One moment she was standing 3 feet away. The next, her fist was driving into his chest with the force of a runaway vehicle. Pain exploded through Jake's chest like a bomb going off inside his ribs. The world spun wildly as his feet left the floor. He flew backward through the air. Unable to breathe. Unable to think. Unable to do anything but experience the pure shock of impact. He crashed through a decorative partition that had been placed along one wall. The lightweight material shattered around him, and then he hit the solid wall behind it. His back slammed into the metal with a sickening thud that drove what little air remained from his lungs. Jake crumpled to the floor in a heap. His vision went white, then dark, then white again. His chest felt like someone had driven a steel rod through it. When he tried to breathe, agony shot through his entire torso. Somewhere far away, he heard shouting, human voices, Veltharian voices, all mixing together in a chaos of sound that his brain could not process. His ears were ringing too loudly. He was aware of movement around him. Footsteps pounding on the deck. Hands touching him carefully. Human hands. Checking for injuries. Someone was talking to him, asking him questions, but the words sounded like they were coming through water. Jake tried to focus. Tried to make sense of what had just happened. Kyvra had hit him. He had called her cute, and she had hit him hard enough to send him flying across the room. The pain in his chest suggested she had done some serious damage. His vision started to clear slightly, though everything still had a strange, fuzzy quality to it. He could see Captain Hayes kneeling beside him, her face pale and tight with worry. Behind her, he could see the Veltharians grouped together, Commander Zyrith standing in front of them like a shield, and Kyvra. She stood apart from the others, her body rigid, her scales still that burning pink color. But her posture was different now. Not aggressive, almost defensive. Like she was bracing for an attack that had not come yet. Dr. Patricia Wells arrived at a run, her medical bag already open. She dropped to her knees beside Jake and immediately began scanning him with a diagnostic device. Her face was professionally calm, but her hands moved with urgent speed. "Do not move," she said firmly. "You have serious injuries. We need to get you to medical now." A hover stretcher appeared, guided by 2 medical technicians. They lifted Jake onto it with practiced care, though even the gentle movement made him gasp with pain. As they started to move him out of the common area, Jake turned his head just enough to see the Veltharians one more time. Commander Zyrith was speaking rapidly in her own language, her voice sharp and commanding. The other Veltharians responded with quick, clipped acknowledgments. But Kyvra said nothing. She just stood there, staring at the spot where Jake had been lying, her expression unreadable. Then the medical team carried him out into the corridor, and the scene disappeared from view. Jake woke up 3 hours later in the medical bay. The pain in his chest had dulled to a heavy ache, which he assumed meant he was on some very good medication. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as fresh pain shot through his ribs. "Stay down," Dr. Wells said from somewhere to his left. "You have 4 cracked ribs, severe bruising across your entire chest cavity, and a concussion. You are lucky to be alive." Jake let his head fall back onto the pillow. "What happened? What happened is that a Veltharian warrior hit you with enough force to throw you 15 feet through the air," Patricia said dryly. She moved into his field of vision, holding a data pad. "According to the impact analysis, she actually pulled the punch at the last second. If she had hit you with full strength, your rib cage would have been crushed to powder, and your heart probably would have stopped." "She pulled the punch?" Jake said, his foggy brain trying to process this information. "According to the Veltharian medical database we have been provided, yes. A full combat strike from a Veltharian of her size and rank would have killed you instantly. What you received was apparently the equivalent of a warning tap that had broken 4 of his ribs." Jake tried to imagine what a full strike would have done, and immediately stopped. The mental image was too disturbing. "Where is she now?" he asked. Patricia's expression darkened. "Confined to her quarters on the Veltharian ship. That is where the real drama is happening right now." Before Jake could ask what she meant, the door to the medical bay opened, and Captain Hayes entered. She looked like she had aged 10 years in the last 3 hours. Her uniform was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "Lieutenant Morrison," she said, coming to stand beside his bed. "Like I was hit by a truck made of muscle and scales," Jake said. "Captain, what is going on?" "Lowe's." Hayes pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. "We have a situation. A serious one. The Veltharians are threatening to end the negotiations and leave immediately." "Because Kyvra hit me?" Jake frowned. "But I insulted her. I did not understand what I was saying. But in their culture, that is not why they want to leave," Hayes interrupted. "Apparently, striking a diplomat during negotiations is one of the most serious breaches of honor in Veltharian culture. It is grounds for immediate exile and permanent loss of rank." Jake felt his stomach drop. "What?" Hayes nodded grimly. "It gets worse. The reason she hit you, according to what Commander Zyrith told me, is because she lost control of her emotions. That scale, color change you saw? That is something Veltharians spend their entire lives learning to suppress. For a high-ranking officer like Kyvra to display it publicly, and then to respond with violence because of it, is considered catastrophic. But I was the one who caused it," Jake protested, ignoring the pain as he tried to sit up again. "I said something insulting without knowing what it meant." Patricia gently pushed him back down. "The Veltharians do not see it that way. In their culture, a true warrior maintains perfect control, regardless of external circumstances. Words should not be able to provoke a loss of control. The fact that yours did means Kyvra is considered weak, unstable, unfit for her position." Jake stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. "So what happens now?" "Now," Hayes said tiredly. Commander Zyrith is demanding that Kyvra be removed from the delegation and sent into exile. The other Veltharians support this decision unanimously. Kyvra herself has not objected. She is apparently accepting the judgment. And the negotiations? Hayes shrugged. Hanging by a thread. The Veltharians are embarrassed that this happened. They see it as a failure of their discipline. A crack in their reputation. Commander Zyrith wants to leave before any more damage is done to their image. Jake closed his eyes. This was a disaster. The alliance humanity desperately needed was falling apart because he had made a casual comment without thinking, because he had seen a moment of genuine emotion from an alien warrior and responded to it like he would with a human friend. I need to speak with them, he said suddenly. Hayes shook her head. You are in no condition. Captain, please. Jake opened his eyes and looked at her directly. This is my fault. Let me try to fix it. It is not your fault, Hayes said firmly. You made an honest mistake. The cultural disconnect is... No, Jake interrupted. It is more than that. I saw something in Kyvra that I recognized. Something human. Or at least something I could relate to. And when I responded to it, I did not think about how different our cultures are. I need to explain that to them. I need to try. Hayes studied him for a long moment. Then she sighed. You are supposed to stay in medical for at least 48 hours. I will come right back, Jake promised. Just give me a chance to speak with Commander Zyrith. Please. Quoting. Patricia looked like she wanted to object, but Hayes raised a hand to stop her. If I allow this, the captain said slowly, you follow orders exactly. You say what you need to say, and then you come directly back here. Understood? Yes, ma'am. And if you collapse or damage yourself further, I am not going to be the one to explain it to your mother, Patricia added sourly. Despite the pain and the situation, Jake almost smiled. Understood, Doctor. It took another hour to make the arrangements. The Veltharians initially refused to meet with Jake at all, but Captain Hayes used every diplomatic trick she had to convince them. Finally, Commander Zyrith agreed to give him 10 minutes. Jake dressed carefully, moving slowly to avoid aggravating his injuries. Patricia had given him additional pain medication and fitted him with a support brace under his uniform to stabilize his ribs. Every breath still hurt, but at least he could walk without falling over. As he prepared to leave the medical bay, Patricia caught his arm. What you are about to do is either very brave or very stupid, she said quietly. Possibly both. Probably both, Jake agreed. Just remember, Lieutenant. The Veltharians are not humans. Do not expect them to think like we do. Jake nodded. I know. But maybe that is exactly why I need to try. The walk to the Veltharian ship felt longer than it should have been. Every step sent small jolts of pain through Jake's chest, reminding him exactly how hard Kyvra had hit him. The support brace helped, but there was only so much it could do for broken ribs. Captain Hayes walked beside him, her presence both comforting and nerve-wracking. She had made it clear that this meeting was highly irregular. The Veltharians were not obligated to hear him out at all. The fact that they had agreed to listen was a courtesy, nothing more. Remember, Hayes said quietly as they approached the airlock that connected to the Veltharian vessel. You have 10 minutes. Commander Zyrith has been very clear about that. Do not waste time on pleasantries. Say what you need to say, and then we leave. Understood, Jake said, though his mouth was dry. The airlock cycled open, revealing a corridor that looked nothing like the human ship. Everything was larger, built to accommodate Veltharian size and strength. The walls were a dark gray metal, polished to a mirror finish. The lighting was dimmer than humans preferred, but still adequate. A Veltharian guard waited for them. A massive male with bronze-colored scales. He said nothing, merely gestured for them to follow. They walked through several corridors, passing other Veltharians, who stopped to stare at the humans. Jake could feel their eyes on him, could sense the tension in the air. News of what had happened had clearly spread through the entire delegation. The guard led them to a large chamber near the center of the ship. The door slid open, revealing what appeared to be a command or conference room. Commander Xyrith stood in the center, her crimson scales gleaming in the overhead lights. Two other Veltharians flanked her, both high-ranking officers based on their armor markings. Captain Hayes and Jake stopped just inside the door. Jake fought the urge to slouch or favor his injured side. He needed to appear strong right now, even if he felt like his chest might cave in at any moment. "Commander Xyrith," Hayes said formally. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." Xyrith's golden eyes moved from Hayes to Jake, studying him with cold intensity. "You are the human who was struck by diplomatic attaché Kyvra." It was not a question, but Jake answered anyway. "Yes, Commander. You should be in medical care. Your injuries are significant." "They are," Jake agreed. "But I needed to speak with you." One of the Veltharians behind Xyrith made a sound that might have been a snort. Xyrith herself remained perfectly still, but Jake saw something shift in her expression. "Explain your reasoning," she said. Jake took a careful breath, trying to ignore the pain it caused. "In human culture, what I said to Atash Kyvra was not an insult. The word cute is a term of endearment, a compliment. I was attempting to acknowledge a moment of genuine emotion and connection. I was trying to show appreciation for it." "You were acknowledging her weakness," Xyrith said flatly. "Her loss of control." "No," Jake said firmly. "I was acknowledging her humanity." The room went very quiet. Even Hayes glanced at him sharply. Jake realized what he had said and pushed forward before anyone could interrupt. "I apologize. I meant her personhood, not specifically humanity. But the principle remains the same. Among my people, the ability to feel emotions and still function is considered a strength, not a weakness. We do not see emotional response as a failure of discipline. We see it as part of what makes us who we are." "Then your people are weak," one of the officers behind Xyrith said coldly. "Are we?" Jake met the officer's eyes. "We have survived wars, plagues, natural disasters, and a dozen different apocalypses in our history. We have spread across multiple star systems. We are here now, negotiating with one of the most powerful warrior races in the galaxy as equals. If we are weak, we hide it well." The officer looked like he wanted to respond, but Xyrith raised a hand, silencing him. Her attention was completely focused on Jake now. "You believe there is more than one form of strength," she said slowly. "I do," Jake said. "I believe that rigid control is one kind of strength, but flexibility, adaptation, the ability to connect with others even when it makes you vulnerable, that is another kind of strength. Maybe an equally important one." Xyrith was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Atash Kyvra displayed a physiological response associated with attraction. She then responded with violence. When you acknowledged this response, how is any of that strength?" "Ace." Jake had known this question was coming, had prepared for it during his walk over, but actually saying the words was harder than he had anticipated. "Because she felt something," he said quietly. "In a culture that tells her feeling anything is wrong, she felt something anyway. And when she thought I was mocking that feeling, she defended herself. She defended her right to feel, even if she did it in a way that hurt me. That took courage." "Courage," Xyrith repeated, as if testing the word in her mouth. "Yes," Jake said. "Courage is not just about facing physical danger. It is also about being vulnerable, about allowing yourself to connect with others even when you know it might hurt you. Atash Kyvra showed me something real in that common area, something genuine. That was brave. And then she struck you for acknowledging it," Xyrith said. "Because she thought I was mocking her," Jake said. "Because in her cultural framework, what I saw as beautiful, she saw as humiliating. But the emotion itself, the willingness to feel it at all, that was not weakness. That was human. Again, I apologize. I mean, that was real. It was honest." Xyrith turned away from him. her hands clasped behind her back. She stared at the wall for so long that Jake began to wonder if the meeting was over. Finally, she spoke. "Your species thinks very differently from mine." "Yes," Jake agreed, "but maybe that is valuable. Maybe what you see as our weakness is actually something that complements your strength. You are disciplined where we are flexible. You are controlled where we are emotional. Together, we might be stronger than either of us. Alone." Xyrith turned back to face him. "You believe this?" "I do," Jake said. "And I think Atash Kaivra showed me why." For just a moment, she let herself feel something. She let herself be curious, interested, maybe even happy looking at that nebula. And it was beautiful to see. Not weak, not shameful. Beautiful. The silence that followed was heavy. Jake could feel his heart pounding. Could feel the pain in his chest intensifying as the medication started to wear off. But he held Xyrith's gaze, refusing to look away. Finally, Xyrith spoke. "I will consider what you have said. But understand this, human. Whether your words were meant as an insult or a compliment does not change what happened." Kaivra lost control. She struck a diplomat. "These are facts." "They are," Jake said. "But facts can be interpreted different ways. In your framework, she failed. In mine, she showed courage and then defended herself when she felt threatened. Maybe both interpretations are true. Maybe that is okay." Xyrith's expression did not change, but something in her posture shifted slightly. "You are asking me to question principles my people have held for thousands of years. I am asking you to consider that there might be more than one way to be strong," Jake said. "That is all." Xyrith looked at Captain Hayes. "Your subordinate is bold. That could be useful or dangerous." Hayes smiled slightly. "Usually both, Commander." For the first time since Jake had met her, Xyrith's expression changed. It was not quite a smile, but something similar. A slight softening around the eyes. "Return to your medical care, Lieutenant Morrison," she said. "I must discuss this with my officers and with Atashe Kaivra herself. We will inform Captain Hayes of our decision." It was a dismissal, but not an unkind one. Jake nodded respectfully, then turned to leave with Captain Hayes. As they walked back through the corridors to the airlock, Jake felt his legs starting to shake. The combination of pain and stress was catching up to him fast. "You did well," Hayes said quietly. "I have no idea if it will work, but you did well." They made it back to the human ship, and Jake managed to walk all the way to the medical bay under his own power. But the moment he was through the door, his legs gave out. Patricia and her team caught him before he hit the floor, guiding him back to the bed. "You are an idiot," Patricia said, but there was no real anger in her voice. "A brave idiot, but still an idiot." Jake wanted to respond, but the pain medication she injected into his arm pulled him under before he could form words. His last conscious thought was of Kaivra standing alone in the common area. Her scales, that impossible pink color, staring at a nebula like it was the most wonderful thing she had ever seen. He hoped he had done enough. He hoped she would not be exiled for simply being brave enough to feel something real. Jake woke to the sound of urgent voices outside the medical bay. His chest still ached, but the sharp edge of pain had dulled to something more manageable. The chronometer on the wall told him he had been asleep for almost 18 hours. Patricia appeared at his bedside immediately, her scanner already running over him. "Good. You are awake. Your ribs are healing well. Better than expected, actually. Veltharian strikes apparently cause very clean breaks. What is happening?" Jake asked, hearing the tension in the voices beyond the door. "Has there been a decision?" Jake asked. "Has there been a decision?" "I do not know," Patricia admitted. "Captain Hayes has been in meetings with the Veltharians for the past 6 hours. Whatever they are discussing, it is taking a long time." Before Jake could ask anything else, the door opened and Captain Hayes entered. She looked exhausted, but there was something different in her expression. Something that might have been hope. "Lieutenant Morrison," she said, You need to get dressed. Commander Xyrith has requested your presence for a formal meeting. Jake sat up carefully, wincing as his ribs protested. What kind of meeting? The kind where we find out if this alliance survives or dies, Hayes said bluntly. They want you there. I do not know if that is a good sign or a bad one. 20 minutes later, Jake was back in uniform and walking toward the conference room. Every step reminded him of what had happened. But the pain was manageable now. Patricia had given him something that she promised would keep him functional for at least a few hours. The conference room had been reconfigured since the last formal meeting. Now, instead of two separate sides, there was a single large table in the center, with chairs for both species arranged around it. It felt less adversarial, more collaborative. The Veltharian delegation was already present. Commander Xyrith sat at the head of the table, her posture rigid and formal. The other Veltharian officers were arranged on either side of her, and at the far end of the table, sitting alone, was Kyvra. She looked different. Her armor was gone, replaced by a simpler uniform. Her scales had returned to their natural azure blue, perfectly controlled, but there was something in her posture. A tension that spoke of someone who had spent hours being questioned and judged. Captain Hayes entered with Jake, and they took seats on the human side of the table. The room was silent, except for the hum of the ship's systems. Commander Xyrith stood, and everyone's attention focused on her immediately. We have reached a decision, she said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. The events of the past 2 days have challenged many assumptions my people hold. Lieutenant Morrison's words, in particular, have forced us to consider perspectives we have long dismissed as weakness. Jake felt his heart pounding. He glanced at Kyvra, but she was staring at the table, her expression carefully blank. After extensive discussion with my officers, and with Atash Kyvra herself, Xyrith continued, we have concluded that this incident reveals a fundamental difference between our species, not a weakness in either of us, but a difference that must be understood and respected. Xyrith looked directly at Jake. You suggested that emotional expression is a form of strength among your people, that the ability to feel and still function is something you value. Is this correct? Yes, Commander, Jake said clearly. And you believe that Atash Kyvra's response, while violent, came from a place of defending something she valued, even if she could not articulate it at the time. I do. Xyrith nodded slowly. We have debated this extensively. The conclusion we have reached may surprise you. We have decided that Lieutenant Morrison is correct. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Every human in the room went very still. Even Kyvra's head came up, her golden eyes widening in clear shock. Atash Kyvra did not fail in discipline, Xyrith said. She failed in understanding. She experienced an emotional response, one that is natural and unavoidable, and she reacted with violence because she did not know how else to process it. This is not weakness. This is ignorance, and ignorance can be corrected. Xyrith turned to face Kyvra directly. You are not being exiled. You are being reassigned. You will work with the human delegation to develop a new framework for understanding between our species. You will learn their ways, and you will teach them ours. Kyvra stood slowly, her movements stiff with disbelief. Commander, I do not understand. Then you will learn to understand, Xyrith said. That is precisely the point. Our people have spent millennia perfecting control and discipline. But perhaps we have forgotten that understanding is also a form of strength. You will help us remember. She turned back to the assembled group. This alliance between humans and Veltharians will proceed, but it will proceed differently than we originally planned. We will not simply exchange trade goods and military support. We will exchange knowledge, culture, understanding. We will learn from each other. Captain Hayes stood. Commander Xyrith, on behalf of humanity, I accept these terms. We are honored by your trust. Xyrith inclined her head in acknowledgement. Then she looked at Jake again. Lieutenant Morrison, You will work directly with Atash Kaivra on this cultural exchange project. You have already demonstrated an ability to see past surface differences. We need that perspective. Jake felt his mouth go dry. I would be honored, Commander. Do not be too honored yet, Zyrith said, and there might have been a hint of amusement in her voice. Working with Kaivra will not be easy. She is stubborn, opinionated, and has a temper that even by Veltharian standards is notable. But she is also brilliant, dedicated, and capable of growth. Try not to say anything that will make her hit you again. Despite the tension in the room, several people laughed. Even Kaivra's scales shifted slightly, taking on a faint green tinge that the human cultural database said indicated embarrassment. The formal meeting continued for another hour, working out the details of the new arrangement. But Jake's attention kept drifting to Kaivra. She sat quietly, listening to everything, occasionally contributing when asked, but mostly she just watched. Those golden eyes moving between speakers as if she was trying to absorb and understand everything at once. When the meeting finally ended, people began filtering out in small groups. Jake stood slowly, his ribs protesting after sitting for so long. He was about to leave when he heard a voice behind him. Lieutenant Morrison. He turned to find Kaivra standing there, alone. Up close, he could see details he had missed before. The way her scales caught the light, each one slightly different from its neighbors. The careful control in her posture that spoke of constant awareness of her own strength. Atash Kaivra, he said cautiously. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, carefully, she spoke. I owe you an apology. I struck you because I did not understand your intention. I caused you significant injury out of ignorance and poor control. This is shameful. You did not know, Jake said. Neither of us did. We were trying to connect across a gap neither of us fully understood. Still, Kaivra said. I hurt you. That was wrong. And I hurt you, Jake said quietly. Maybe not physically. But I made you feel exposed, vulnerable, mocked. That was wrong too, even if I did not mean it. Kaivra's scales shifted slightly, that pink tinge creeping back into them. But this time she did not try to hide it. She looked down at her hands, then back up at Jake. When you said I was cute, she said slowly, I thought you were laughing at me. At my weakness. At my inability to control something that I have been trained since childhood to suppress. I was not laughing, Jake said. I was admiring your courage. The courage to feel something real in a moment when you were supposed to be perfectly controlled. That is what I saw. That is what I was trying to acknowledge. Your people truly see emotions as strength? We do. Not instead of discipline, but alongside it. The strongest person is not the one who never feels anything. It is the one who feels everything and chooses how to respond. Kaivra absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. This will take time for me to understand. We have time, Jake said. That is what this assignment is about. Right? Learning to understand each other. For the first time since he had met her, Kaivra smiled. It was a small thing. Barely a shift in her expression. But it was real. I am told that working with me will be difficult. That I am stubborn and have a temper. I heard that too, Jake admitted. But I think we will manage. I will try not to hit you again, Kaivra said. And there was something in her tone that might have been humor. I appreciate that, Jake said, smiling. And I will try not to call you cute again. Unless you decide you like it, in which case all bets are off. The pink tinge in her scales brightened, spreading up her neck and onto her face. But this time she did not look angry or embarrassed. She looked curious, maybe even pleased. This is going to be interesting, she said. Yes, Jake agreed. Yes, it is. Over the following weeks, something unprecedented happened. Jake and Kaivra began working together to develop what they called the Cultural Bridge Project. They spent hours each day talking, comparing their species' approaches to everything from combat tactics to art to family structures. It was not easy. They argued frequently, sometimes loudly. Kyvra's temper was as notable as Commander Zyrith had warned, and Jake's tendency to push boundaries did not always mesh well with Veltharian sensibilities. But they learned. Kyvra began to understand that human emotional expression was not chaos but a different kind of order. Jake began to understand that Veltharian discipline was not coldness, but a different kind of passion. They shared meals, despite their different dietary needs. They walked through the observation areas together, watching nebulas and distant stars. They taught each other their languages, their customs, their ways of seeing the universe, and slowly, something grew between them. Not romance exactly, at least not yet, but the foundation for it. A respect that went deeper than professional courtesy, an appreciation that went beyond cultural curiosity. A connection that neither of them had expected, but both of them valued. The Veltharian High Command, after reviewing the Cultural Bridge Project's early results, made an unprecedented decision. They would begin incorporating emotional awareness training into their military academies, not to replace their emphasis on discipline, but to complement it, to create warriors who were strong in both body and heart. It was a small change, barely noticed by most. But for a society that had not changed its fundamental approach to training in thousands of years, it was revolutionary. And it had all started because one human saw something beautiful in an alien warrior's moment of vulnerability and had the courage to acknowledge it. 3 months after the incident, Jake and Kyvra stood together in the same observation room where everything had begun. The nebula was still there, still beautiful, still swirling with colors that neither species had adequate words to describe. "I have been thinking," Kyvra said quietly, her scales that soft pink color that Jake now recognized as contentment, "about what you said that day." "Which part?" Jake asked. "The part where you called me cute." She glanced at him, her golden eyes bright with something that might have been mischief. "I understand now what you meant, and I have decided that I do not mind it." Jake felt warmth spread through his chest, different from the pain that had lived there for weeks. "Is that so?" "Yes," Kyvra said. "Though if you tell any other Veltharian I said that, I will hit you again." "Noted," Jake said, grinning. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the nebula spin through the endless dark. Two very different people from two very different worlds, finding common ground in the space between. And in that moment, both of them understood something profound. That the strongest bridges are not built from similarity, but from the willingness to value difference. That true strength comes not from control alone or emotion alone, but from the balance between them. That sometimes, the best thing you can do is acknowledge beauty when you see it, even if you do not fully understand it yet, even if it makes someone blush.